people think that the Israeli economy is strong, but actually it's an indication of weakness. The budget proposal that the government is now sending to the Israeli Knesset for approval, they're not talking about a return to a previous situation of ongoing occupation. That last question, can Israel afford to buy the weapons? Here, at least, I can give an answer because that is my field of study, and the answer is no. South Africa has taken such an important position by suing Israel in the International Court of Justice against the crime of genocide. But at the same time, the name Yom Kippur War is the Israeli name. That's also part of the propaganda. International Convention for the Prevention of and Punishment of Genocide. This convention clearly states that military connections with a country that is committing genocide is illegal. But in fact,
Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. If you want to support us further, consider becoming a YouTube member, be a Patreon, or just donate small amounts in the link given in the description below. Either way, please watch the show, hit like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Dr. Shir Hever. Dr. Hever is an independent economic researcher, manager of the Alliance for Justice between Israelis and Palestinians, and coordinator of the military embargo campaign for the Boycott National Committee. Dr. Hever, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Thanks for having me, Jyotish.
I want to take a quick update on the Israeli economy, given last time you were here, we discussed so much about structural weaknesses in the Israeli economy. I was very curious when I read the quarterly three data in mid-November that spoke about 3.8% growth, and it was projected as a rebound of the Israeli economy. I wanted to have your response, given we discussed so much about the crisis that Israeli economy has been going through. And the big context for our viewers who didn't watch that show was the downgrading of the Israeli bond rating by major credit agencies, including S&P, Moody's, and Fitch. Your response to that?
Yeah, we have to separate propaganda and reality. The projection of a growth that doesn't exist is based on an assumption that somehow the world is going to go back to the situation that it was before the genocide has started. And this is not going to happen. No, I think nobody believes that it will happen from the people who live in Palestine, whether they are Palestinians or Israelis, but maybe in the world, and especially within financial circles that have a lot of strategic reasons to support Zionism, they see a reason to promote this kind of propaganda. But we have the real economy, which is in an unprecedented level of crisis. The crisis is only intensifying. There is a crisis in standard of living of Israelis that they are burning through their savings because costs are skyrocketing, which is also a result of disruptions in international trade and the weakening of the purchasing power of Israelis. And at the same time, we have a lot of Israelis, more than 50% of all of the savings through institutional organizations, but also private savings, have been shifted outside of the country. So this creates a financial appearance or illusion that the economy is recovering because investments that are made in North America or in Europe are bringing in dividends and profits, some of them on paper, some of them in actual foreign currency that is then converted into Israeli currency, creating a short-term burst in the value of the Israeli currency. And this may make people think that the Israeli economy is strong, but actually it's an indication of weakness because the Israelis themselves don't believe in their own economy and they're shifting all of their investments abroad.
I want to move on, but just one last question in this regard. I was going through Fitz's press conference, and they said that if the ceasefire, as it is now being talked of and would be hopefully come into existence from Sunday, if it comes true, then that would be a great relief for the Israeli economy, given what they see, whether it's the problem of deficit financing, rising debt to GDP ratio, the inflation is a result of the unprecedented amount of public spending because of the war. And they say if the ceasefire comes into existence, it would come as a great relief for the Israeli economy. Uh, do you think that's true?
Well, what you said in your previous question is that you are basing the premise of your question on the reports from the third quarter. The third quarter means, in the Israeli context, before the budget for the next year has been approved. Because the budget has to legally be approved by October. Otherwise, the government falls for the budget for the next year. We are now in January, and the budget has not been approved. The Israeli government changed the law to give them more time, but they did promote a draft of the budget. And this draft, which hasn't been voted on yet, looks like what the government is actually planning to spend. So all of these agencies that say, oh, there's a ceasefire, so everything's going to be normal. Do they believe that Israel is planning to end the war, withdraw from the territory that was conquered illegally from Lebanon and from Syria? Do they believe that hundreds of thousands of reservists will be released from service and will go back to work into the workforce? Do they even have jobs left when they go back after some 200, 300, sometimes 400 days of reserve duty without pause? So they lost their contact with their family, they lost their jobs. Do they believe that things can just go back to normal? If I look at the budget proposal that the government is now sending to the Israeli Knesset for approval, they're not talking about a return to a previous situation of ongoing occupation, low intensity, asymmetrical conflict. They are talking about building a Sparta, in a sense of a society which is highly militarized. And this brings us directly to the concept, to the topic of the military embargo, because it looks like a budget that was formulated as a response to the military embargo. You mentioned the ceasefire. Let's not forget, the same ceasefire agreement, the same conditions were on the table and were accepted by Hamas a year ago. Israel refused to accept them. When the Biden administration threatened that if Israel doesn't accept the ceasefire agreement and will continue to violate international law and kill civilians in the Gaza Strip, then some of the weapons from the United States will be delayed or stopped before they reach Israel. Netanyahu said, we will fight with our fingernails. Now, this was, of course, a populist statement because he was speaking to his own public, telling them, don't worry, we have all the weapons we need. There is no military embargo. And I think back then, the Israeli public believed him. They really thought that there is no risk of a comprehensive military embargo against Israel. They were, of course, very wrong. And now, the same conditions are suddenly completely acceptable to the Israelis, because now they know that if the United States is no longer making empty threats. The Biden administration has not been honest in those threats. They never followed up on them. And the dependency of Israel on those American weapons has become so extreme because nobody else, or well, with some exception of Germany, Serbia, there are some countries that deliver only very specific contracts, certain materials or items in violation of international law, but and violate basically the obligation to impose a military embargo. But this time the Israelis feel it. This time the Israelis know that the military embargo is so strong, and the budget has been written to counteract that, or in a kind of way to try to avoid the embargo.
Yeah, this reminds me of what is sometimes called as the lost decade after the Yom Kippur. There was a lot of attempt to replace a lot of foreign arms by domestic manufacturing, and it was really hard on the Israeli economy. It was called as the lost decade.
Absolutely, but let's talk about this, because first of all, the name Yom Kippur War is the Israeli name. You know, that's also part of the propaganda. I call it the 73 War, which is a more neutral way of calling it. Others call it the October War. But it's also important to remember that the October War was called October because it started with a surprise attack against Israel on October 6th. And the hubris, arrogance of the Israelis, that they thought that they can occupy, they can take territory and also bomb civilian targets within Egypt, within Syria, and nothing will happen because the Arabs are afraid of them, because the Arabs cannot fight. Israel has superiority in its intelligence and its air force and all of that. So, and then they were taken by surprise on October 6th. And Israel, 50 years before the October 7 attack, just to show how deeply entrenched is this arrogance, that the Israelis didn't learn the lesson and fell for the same mistake again. But this is part of colonialism. This is how colonial arrogance works. But I do think that the mistake that the Israelis made in 73 was much deeper than just underestimating their Arab neighbors and not preparing for the war, but also in their response to the military embargo. Because after the occupation of 67, when Israel's largest arms supplier, at the time it was France, imposed the military embargo on Israel, if Israel doesn't withdraw from the occupied territory, the response within Israel was, we don't need France, we will make everything on our own. And they passed a budget back then very similar to the budget that we see now being proposed, meaning spending tremendous amounts of money on building all of the weapons domestically. The artillery, the tanks, the airplanes, the ships, they try to make everything locally so they don't depend on France or other countries for imports. When the war started and Syria and Egypt attacked Israel using Soviet weapons, those weapons were far superior to the Israeli weapons. The Israelis had no chance, and they were really about to be completely wiped out on the battlefield until the United States, Henry Kissinger, approved a massive shipping of weapons to Israel in a very similar way to what we see now, right? So if now the military embargo is tightening around Israel and the response of the Israelis is, let's make everything domestically, let's spend tens of billions of dollars and build factories. One of the most amazing things that I saw in the Israeli media, where they were saying, we're going to make factories to build materials for the bombs. Well, that's not how chemistry works. You cannot build a material. You have to mine the material, and natural resources that don't exist, you cannot manufacture them. You have to import them. So it's built again on the same fallacy, on the same arrogance that somehow the Israeli military power can be rebuilt in the face of a military embargo. It shows no historical memory, or a very short historical memory of Israelis, and that's not a prospect for success. I think the rating agencies, the financial newspapers and so on, when they don't see what's happening there, they are doing a disservice to their own customers, to their own readers or consumers, because they're not giving them the full picture. They're not telling them what the economic situation really is.
You mentioned a comprehensive military embargo. Can you discuss some specific countries and actions taken by them so that our viewers get a better sense of where this is coming from?
Yes, after 15 months of genocide, the BDS movement has published now an article to try to show how the military embargo has gained momentum. So this article summarizes the dozens of campaigns from around the world that have successfully restricted the flow of weapons to Israel. And even in the face of an ongoing genocide, the ceasefire doesn't mean the genocide is stopped. But even in that moment, it's very critical that we don't lose hope. And we have to acknowledge and recognize that activists who have worked so hard had successes in stopping weapons. And every time weapons are stopped, it saves human lives. So you wanted examples. Let me give you some examples. We see countries in the global south mostly who have made strong announcements against the genocide. We saw that coming from Colombia, from Brazil, from Chile, and starting to ban Israeli companies from participating in tenders and canceling contracts that were already signed. We see even countries in the global north, which are usually the last to take the moral standpoint, but they are impacted by the legal pressure. They don't want to get into trouble for violating international law, and international law is very clear on this issue. So countries in the global north, whether it's Italy and Spain and the UK and Canada and France, are all making statements about how they're going to restrict, or they have already restricted, a contract with Israeli companies. They try to interpret, in the Netherlands, the court has actually ruled that transiting F-35 parts to Israel is illegal. Not only if they are produced in the Netherlands, but also if they are produced in the United States and transited through the Netherlands. This is a very important precedent because indeed the Dutch court recognizes here the legal obligation not to transit. So now there's a court case in Ireland. Ireland canceled import contracts from Israel for weapons, does not, as far as we know, sell any weapons to Israel, but they have allowed on several occasions the Shannon airport in Ireland to be used to transit weapons to Israel. So seeing that this is illegal, there's now a court case in Ireland as well to stop that. Portugal, after a very effective campaign, because Portugal gave the flag to a ship that was illegally transiting explosives to Israel, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Portugal said, well, we're going to withdraw the flag. As long as the ship is sailing under our flag, it cannot deliver weapons to Israel. That would be an illegal act on sovereign Portuguese soil, because that's how the flag system works for shipping law. And once they give away their flag, we don't have any control. But in order to make sure that we are doing the due diligence that is required of us under international law, we will also ban the transiting of weapons to Israel through our airspace and through our ports. This is very important because Portugal has bases, ports and airports in the middle of the Atlantic, which are very crucial for the US supply chain to Israel. So even if the United States is willing to ignore the genocide, ignore its obligations under international law, and they consider themselves to be above the law because they're a superpower, but they cannot teleport the weapons to Israel. They need to pass them through Europe. There is no other way. And in Europe, we see the unions rising up, making statements, we will refuse to deliver to transit weapons. Sometimes the governments ignore the unions. And in one very exciting case in Greece, the union workers in the dock in the town of Piraeus discovered that the port city of Piraeus, they discovered that a ship is carrying containers of ammunition to Israel, and they managed to take one of those containers of ammunition. We're talking about many tons of ammunition. They took the container to the fish market and guarded it so nobody can move it until the ship had to leave. And so they never got their weapons. Just try to imagine what it means, how many lives are saved if a whole container full of bullets doesn't make it to Israel to be used in Gaza. And we've seen action by unions in Belgium, in Portugal, in Spain, in the Netherlands, in Sweden very recently, just a week ago, making a strong statement against loading weapons or unloading weapons, meaning it's a both-way military embargo, because the legal obligation is actually a three-way military embargo, right? Not to sell, not to buy, and not to transit. That's how the law clarifies it. And we have these campaigns all over the world. I think what we're seeing from all of these many examples, I don't want to bore the listeners and anyone who wants to get more of those inspiring examples, I recommend reading the article on the website of the BDS movement. It's called "The Military Embargo is Here," so not hard to find. But I do want to say something about the structure of these campaigns, because they all have a similar structure. It starts with the grassroots activism. It starts with groups on the ground that want to know, what can we do to stop the weapons? What can we contribute to end this genocide, and to not just the genocide, but the occupation, the apartheid? All of this is illegal, and it requires weapons to impose it, and the weapons need to be stopped. And then they start to organize in a strategic way, doing research, contacting local unions, contacting academia, contacting lawyers. The lawyers say we need to have a protest that showcases the information so that the judges will know that we are serious, and it's a movement, and it's not just some people who want to raise this issue. So from the grassroots movement, it starts to escalate. It goes to civil society, academia, unions, then to the courts, and finally to the governments. And when the governments impose only military embargo, is only something that only a government can impose, even if corporations also have obligations under international law, but the corporations will never volunteer to impose international law. They wait for the government, and then when we reach the level of the government, and we are reaching it in more and more countries around the world, then this is how the military embargo really tightens. It's a complex chain of supply. Weapons are complex technologies. They require materials and components from different parts. Israel doesn't have the technological capacity to make these weapons. They don't have the raw materials. They don't have the industrial capacity. So they need to put it all together, and which makes those supply chains vulnerable. And we're seeing more and more success in disrupting those supply chains, implementing international law, and this means really saving human lives.
I'm so glad you emphasized that this is not a single or a set of governments taking actions in accordance with international law, but it involves the whole supply chain, shipping, cargo, dual-use goods, workers' unions, activists, government, courts, and so on. I wanted to ask you if this campaign that you're calling the military embargo campaign, is this limited to weapons and ammunitions, or can it spill over to not just dual-use goods, but also coal, iron, other energy and metallurgy related industries, and so on?
Yeah, the power of our campaign is that it is based on a sound legal ground. So we should always be very focused and strategic. Not to say, like, because we want to impose a military embargo and we have a momentum and we have so many countries that are willing to participate, that we will use that to promote the boycott of other products just because to exploit the momentum. That this will be counterproductive for things like consumer goods, food. But you asked about coal, you asked about energy. Energy is not a consumer good, it's a dual use item. All the Israeli military bases are powered by electricity that is generated from coal and natural gas. All of the Israeli tanks run on diesel, which is distilled from oil, from crude oil in the Israeli refineries. The jets that are bombing Gaza and Lebanon and Syria use jet fuel and require jet fuel for their operation. So so this means it's not an external part to the military embargo campaign. It is the military embargo campaign. And the same activists who have started this protest in countries like Spain and Portugal are now highlighting that the companies like Chevron, which is providing energy, countries like South Africa. South Africa has taken such an important position by suing Israel in the International Court of Justice against the crime of genocide. But at the same time, it sells coal to Israel, which is used to power Israel's military. And just think about the servers that are used to generate targets for the Israeli artillery and air force to kill tens of thousands of people. These servers consume tremendous amounts of electricity. The Israeli power plants are not separated for the military and for the rest of the population. It's one grid. And you have the companies like Maersk, the Danish company, which is bringing tremendous amounts of crude oil to and jet fuel, which is already refined, on their tankers through the Mediterranean to Israel in order to fuel the oil is for the diesel for the tanks, the jet fuel for the warplanes. This is illegal. Maersk is a gigantic company, but because the military embargo has been so powerful and so effective, the activists are empowered now and they're not afraid of Maersk, and they're willing to take on a giant corporation like Maersk and to escalate the pressure, and they're starting to succeed.
I wanted to ask you about the US in particular. For one reason, it's the biggest supplier of arms to Israel. For another, I was reading about the huge investments of US sovereign bonds held by states and counties. More than 36 states and counties invested more than 1.8 billion US dollar from October to April when I had the data, including Palm County in Florida, where Trump's residence exists, which bought bonds worth 700 million US dollar worth several F-16 or F-35 fighters. Given that level, and of course there were talks about mismanagement of these investments when the credit ratings were downgraded, saying that you can't do that. But if the credit ratings are upgraded after the ceasefire, given that level of deep enmeshment, if you like, of the US military industrial complex and the financial complex with the Israelis, Israeli economy and the military complex, how confident are you that this military embargo campaign, which is taking place globally, will succeed?
Yeah, the military embargo is one thing. The financial support for Israel through buying bonds is a different issue, because of course, if Israel has more money. It uses the money to
Yeah,
buy weapons.
that money comes back to the U.S. military complex in the form of they buy them back from the U.S.
Yeah, so this has been an issue of contention between the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats, under Biden especially, have shown a limitless willingness to give weapons to Israel for free. Of course, the military embargo, the military industrial complex in the United States profits a lot from it. They are paid for the weapons, but they're paid with American tax dollar money. Nevertheless, Israel has been spending more money than they could possibly afford on this war. And I've seen some of the reports about the weapons that they are buying at full price, and sometimes more than full price, because their usual suppliers are saying we cannot sell to you, it's illegal. And so they're trying to find in the black market somebody who will sell them the bombs, the explosives, and so on. And they pay a lot more. And they do need a lot of money for it. And I saw last week a report by Israeli economist that said the whole cost of the war was actually covered by debt. By debt. Because the ability of the government to generate income has been severely compromised by the most educated and productive members of society leaving the country or being in reserve duty for most of the year. So if they cannot generate income and they want to spend tens of billions on weapons, they need the money to take it from somewhere, and all they do is just generate more and more debt. Under these conditions, I find it that the possibility that because of a ceasefire, the credit agencies will say, oh, let's now restore Israel's credit rating, when the debt has exploded out of control. Unlikely, and I may be underestimating the ability of these credit agencies to fall for propaganda and hype. It's hard for me to imagine that these people are not intelligent enough to see that there is no recovery of the Israeli economy, and it's quite the opposite. The federal government in the United States is not able, for various legal reasons, to give money to Israel. And the examples that you gave are from the state level and from the municipal level. So buying Israel bonds, for example, is one way for them to support Israel, to support the genocide and the colonization of Palestine, for political reasons, because they're not going to see any profit. And if they are buying those bonds, especially if they buy the bonds that are not close to expiration, I mean the bonds that are more long term, 5-year bonds, 10 years bonds, 20 years bonds, and I do see that these bonds are being sold sometimes, and I wonder to myself, who is stupid enough to think that they can buy a 10-year bond and ever see their money back? This is really just throwing money to the garbage. But maybe that's what they want. Maybe they see it as a donation. So the investment campaigns are very important as well. The investment campaigns are part of the BDS movement, and they have always been a very key component of the BDS activism in the United States, because in many municipalities you can have a large group of people who would have an impact on their local municipality. You know, it's very difficult to impact the federal government, it's so far away, but the local town, the local city council is something that people can influence. They can go to town hall meetings and say, we don't want to invest in these bonds that are not going to make any profit, of course, but in addition to this, it's immoral, and we don't want to be complicit in those crimes. So this is something that is absolutely part of it, and I do think that, going back to what I said about this dissenting voices between the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States, and it's really not my field of expertise, but I have heard voices from the Republican Party, including from some comments by Trump and from Vice President elect Vance, saying, we have nothing against selling weapons to Israel, but we are not so willing to give them for free in the same way that the Biden administration has. Now, let's assume that the Trump administration will put no limitations on Israel requests to buy F-35 planes, smart bombs, dumb bombs, all of that stuff. Will he also accept that Israel will just get all of those weapons for free when the same weapons can be sold for a profit? And if not, can Israel afford to buy those weapons? So that last question, can Israel afford to buy the weapons? Here, at least, I can give an answer because that is my field of study. And the answer is no, they cannot afford it. If they don't get it for free, they don't get it at all.
Yeah, a Brown University study that I read noted some 18 billion US dollar aid, most of which came, or in fact, all of which came back to the US in the form of Israel buying them back, buying US weapons.
That's
Yeah.
not accurate. No, these
Okay.
$18 billion is foreign military financing, FMF, which means that the US is taking the taxpayer money of American citizens, giving them to the giant arms corporations like General Dynamics and Lockheed Martin and Boeing, so that they will manufacture the weapons, which are then given to Israel for free. So these giant corporations are certainly making a huge profit, but it's the US taxpayers who pay for it. And those 18 billion specifically didn't cost Israel any money. They got the weapons for free. Of course, the Israeli economy is still collapsing for a lot of reasons. So it's not like, nobody in Israel is also going to become rich because they get free F-35 planes. That's it doesn't improve the standard of living of Israelis, of course. But this is the story of those 18 billion. And Biden now, seeing that he has a very short time left in office, is trying to push for an $8 billion extra contract. And I think the reason that he's in such a hurry is that he still thinks that maybe he can push it as part of the FMF, the foreign military financing, so that it doesn't cost the Israelis anything. And he wants to finance it with US taxpayer money. I hope that it will not pass before Trump is inaugurated, because once Trump is inaugurated, there's a better chance that this deal will not pass.
Yeah, that's what I meant when I said it comes back. It doesn't come back in the sense it doesn't go out, because it's just an accounting thing, which are then converted into military contracts. So essentially, that amount of aid being sanctioned, which is then placed as military contracts with these weapons manufacturing corporations. That's how I understood.
It's more than accounting, because it turns the United States into a military industrial complex, and it takes money from social services, from health, from education, from the general population, and puts it into the pockets of the arms
Yeah. No, I just meant like coming back is when I said the money comes back, that's the accounting thing. But of course, it's real money taken out of taxpayers' coffers and put into the arms manufacturers to send those ships of bunker busters into Israel that eventually drops in Gaza. I wanted to ask you about something that you said, which I think is important to understand the BDS movement in its larger essence. You said that one has to be careful about where the boycotts and divestments are used. You mentioned consumer goods. I was curious about research institutions, given they are also part of the military, whether it's weapons manufacturing, intelligence gathering, and so on. And a lot of that became part of the huge student-led protests that happened in the US. Can you talk a little bit about what is the position of the BDS with regards to universities and research institutions?
With pleasure. I think maybe I need to clarify myself now that I hear the way that you're reflecting what I said before. I should be more accurate because I'm not opposed to the boycott of consumer goods, of course. The BDS movement calls for a boycott of consumer goods made in Israel, and especially in the context of the targeted boycotts, because we have just recently published a few days ago the list of companies that we are calling on people to boycott in order to target in those particular companies because targeted boycotts are more effective. So I wouldn't use the word careful as the main word. Of course, we should always be careful and not to make mistakes and not to target the wrong companies and things like that. But most important is to be strategic, right? And that was my point about the military embargo, that if we have a campaign for the military embargo based on arguments of the military embargo and research on the military embargo, this is a strategic way to move forward. And if we want to have a campaign about a company like the supermarket chain Carrefour, which is opened branches in Israel and in the occupied territory illegally, and it's a target for a boycott movement, then because it was so strategic and because it was so effective, Carrefour is starting to close all of their branches in countries where the boycott becomes unbearable for them, like in Jordan. So Carrefour has been driven out of Jordan because of their very poor decision to invest in Israel, knowing full well that this comes with a boycott campaign. They were warned, they ignored the warning, they made a mistake, they lost a lot of money. Okay, but let me go back to your question now, the academic boycott. So the academic boycott has different aspects to it because it is, after all, based on moral and legal arguments as well. The discrimination of Palestinian students in Israeli universities, the complicity of the Israeli academic institutions in the Israeli military, giving special grants and benefits to soldiers. The Israeli universities actually approved a new policy where students who serve in Gaza as reservists will receive exemptions from courses, from classes, based on how long they were in Gaza. You kill more people, you can get your degree with taking less classes, which I think also completely undermines the value of these universities in the world, because why would you take a graduate from university that you know that their academic achievements are not a reflection of their studies, but a reflection of their war crimes. So this is but you asked more specifically about the role of the academic cooperation in the military embargo, because Israeli universities are also developing weapons, developing military research. The most famous example of this is the Technion. The Technion is a university based in Haifa, which is a technical university. So they have a whole department in the School of Engineering, which is financed by Israel's arms company Elbit Systems to develop optical systems for drones. You have other Israeli arms companies which are financing the students to work on specific projects they need for specific weapons. The Technion has also developed a remote-controlled bulldozer, a D9 bulldozer, which Israel buys from Caterpillar, a company worthy of boycott and divestment, of course. And Caterpillar bulldozers, these are then remotely controlled with a system that was developed by the Technion in order to destroy houses where there are still people inside the house. The idea is that if there's a human driver, then there's maybe a physical risk to the driver, but also a moral risk. and the legal risk. But by driving the bulldozer remotely to murder people inside their own homes by demolishing the home in which they are, the Technion has developed a way for Israel to commit these atrocities with impunity. Every university that has a research cooperation with the Technion or with other Israeli universities that are involved in similar projects, and most of them are, is morally and ethically and legally obligated to stop these research corporations. This is a very important point. I mean, there is, in the same way that there are ethical limitations on research when it comes to testing things on human beings. It needs to be done in a very ethical way. And if there is a medicine that has been proven effective, but it was tested on human beings in an unethical way, it would be impossible to develop this medicine. For a good reason. These safeguards are necessary. So in Israel, you have the campuses themselves built in a way that they are partially military bases. You have contracts between the military and Israeli universities that students can go around in uniform, that the military can decide whether certain professors are allowed to teach certain classes because of possible security risks. So, you know, in the way that the military is considering it. So Palestinian professors would be just denied the right to do their work because the military doesn't want a Palestinian professor to teach soldiers. Then these soldiers are bringing into the university their desires and needs from the battlefield or from the occupied territory, what the kind of surveillance they need, what kind of bomb they need. And the university is receiving government grants to work with those private arms companies and develop solutions to these illegal demand for technology. This kind of arrangement goes far beyond what is normal for university cooperation with technologies and with private companies. This crosses ethical lines, and therefore the BDS movement absolutely calls to suspend research ties with these Israeli universities.
Can you talk about the legal ramification? Because in that article, you write that I don't know, I should say you, because it seems that you have contributed, but there must be others involved as well. But the article says that it's not just a moral obligation, but it's also a legal obligation. What do you mean by legal obligation? Are there international sanctions? Are there national laws in some countries which stop some of these transactions? Or can you explain a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, of course. I didn't write this article alone, of course. This is something, a joint work of so many organizations. Because there are so many countries involved and so many unions and so many, then the contributions need to be coordinated between these different people. And I'm not going to write, look what happened in Portugal without talking to the people in Portugal who have been doing all the work on the ground to make sure that it happens. So that's my role as a coordinator of the military embargo, just to be clear on that point. But your question was about the legal framework. So there are different treaties and conventions which specify under what conditions military trade can take place. We still live, unfortunately, in a world in which war in itself is not illegal. This, I think, is a sad reality. I would rather live in a world in which all war is illegal. But there are laws that regulate what is allowed and what is not. Let's start with one of the oldest agreements, which is the International Convention for the Prevention of and Punishment of Genocide. This convention clearly states that military connections with a country that is committing genocide is illegal. But in fact, the groundwork of the legal work that was done by lawyers, first and foremost by Palestinian lawyers, and I should mention the Palestinian organization El Haq, which is an organization for legal rights, and they did a very groundbreaking work to show that actually it doesn't need also to cross the threshold of genocide to make the military ties illegal. And even before the genocide started, the military ties were already illegal. Now it crossed another threshold, meaning that it's even more important not to ignore the crimes that are being committed. Every one of those of the international organizations that were established to regulate international law, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the United Nations even itself, were all founded after World War II. They were founded because in World War II, there was the Axis powers, and especially Germany, committed atrocities, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide. And the world said, we cannot allow this to happen again. And they established all of these international organizations, and they established a body of international law. In 2014, so many years later, we also have the ATT, the Arms Trade Treaty, which has been signed and approved by about 120 countries around the world. Unfortunately, not India and not the United States. But the ATT, most of the world did ratify the ATT agreement, and the ATT also has very clear text saying if a country is using weapons to commit war crimes, it's the obligation of other countries, of third-party countries, to conduct due diligence and make sure that they do not sell or transit weapons from their territory to the country which is committing those crimes. One loophole in the ATT, unfortunately, is that it doesn't say that it's illegal to buy weapons from a country committing those crimes. And many of those arms deals are reciprocal. And so buying weapons from Israel is something that finances the Israeli war machine and also makes it more likely to cause other violations of also selling weapons to Israel. So in complex reciprocal deals. But for that, there are other agreements. There is the common position of the European Council. It's just for Europe, but it nevertheless is very important because the common position is also a tool to prevent the transiting of weapons. And because the transiting is happening through Europe, then it's very important that we have this common position. So without getting into a whole legal lecture now about all the different treaties and agreement, I think it's important to highlight that we are now living in a different world than the world of World War II. The world has changed because the process of building international law hasn't ended. We have, like I mentioned the ICJ and the ICC in one breath, but actually there have been a long period of time between the establishing of the first and the establishing of the second, right? So it's a process that more and more elements of international law come into play. And now the forefront of where this international law is really put to the test, the burning point of the whole world is Gaza. The whole world is looking at Gaza to see, is international law strong enough to prevent a recurrence of the atrocities of World War II? I'm talking to you from Germany, so I have to say with great sadness that Germany, which is the country that committed those atrocities in the first place, and because of Germany there are all of these international law organizations, seems to now be willing to break those laws and to ignore them. But this is a serious problem. In our last conversation, we also spoke about Germany a little bit, but this time I think Germany is standing alone. And I think that there is a lot of cause for hope that international law will actually prevail. It means that with in light of all this tremendous suffering in Gaza, also in the West Bank, also in Lebanon and Syria, all of this pain and all of the death, but we the fact that we are making progress, the fact that the military embargo is getting momentum, and that Israel is eventually going to be stopped. This is not a question of if, it's a question of when. Then there is reason for hope, and there is also reason for action.
My last question, to what extent do you think these growing positive developments as far as the military embargo is concerned is going to be permanent, in the sense that they would be attached to the Zionist regime itself, rather than saying that this is something temporary because of what Israel is doing after October 7 in terms of carrying out the genocide?
Well, the way that these legal mechanisms are established is that they put a very high bar before the proceedings can actually begin. It took so many years until the chief prosecutor of the International Court of Criminal Court, the ICC, agreed to even request arrest warrants. But during this very long time, Israel has been given the option to defend itself legally, to say Israel is going to establish its own legal system and prosecute against its own criminals. Of course, they had no intention of doing that. They did quite the opposite. So now, once the arrest warrants have been issued, once the General Assembly of the UN declared that the ICJ advisory opinion that the occupation itself is illegal has been adopted by 124 countries, that's more than 2/3 majority of the countries that voted, and so international law has spoken now, then the only thing that Israel can now do is completely end the occupation and the apartheid system. And unless they do this, then just a ceasefire it's not going to cut it. It's not going to make the ICC revoke the arrest warrant. It's not going to make the ATT say now it's fine to sell the weapons. No, these things are embedded in the crimes that are so deeply essential to the Israeli policy, the government policy, the direction that the Zionist movement has taken into turning Israel's settler colony into a settler colony that attempts to eliminate the indigenous population, and these things are not temporary in that sense. So it's not.
Sorry for the just to be a little bit more clear, the actions of the countries that you have mentioned, have they been in the context of the genocide in Gaza, or have they come in the larger context of occupation, settler colonialism in occupied West Bank, and so on?
Right. Okay. Well, because we are doing all of this military embargo campaign with a very strong legal basis, then, but of course, it's not just the legal basis; it's also the political, the grassroots action. So people were motivated to take to the streets and to protest because of the genocide. We have to acknowledge that. Not because they read some treaty of international law that was written 50 years ago. They see the horrors of Gaza and they want to take action now. Once the government changes policy, the government cannot say we changed our policy because people are angry in the streets. The government says, okay, we are convinced that we have to take action, but we are going to say, based on this legal treaty and this legal treaty, we are imposing the policy. And once they do this, then the fact that the genocide was a turning point or a trigger for those policies doesn't mean that this is the same the groundwork which makes those policies sustainable. They are sustained by the international law. So I hope this point is clear, meaning that unless the crimes themselves stop, the policies cannot change.
Dr. Hever, thanks for joining us. It's such a pleasure and privilege to have you on always.
Thank you very much, Yatish.
All right.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.